I see them listed here. You can also pin them to this area to keep them nicely, conveniently accessible. And you can browse the workbooks that people have shared with you through maybe OneDrive or Outlook directly from here. So the home page is a nice area to get started. And when you click on New, it just shows you the templates that we just saw on the home page. And Open, of course, is going to show you an area where you can browse your cloud services like maybe SharePoint or OneDrive, or even browse your PC to select the file or a workbook and open it, or even access your autosave workbooks. In case there's been a crash, you can recover any unsaved workbooks directly from here. Very powerful feature. So a lot to discover here in the start screen. Not too many changes that I've seen. We still have our account where we can sign into directly from the top hand side, which I'm already signed in as. We still have the Excel options at the very bottom. We have our account information at the bottom where we can give that a click. And here we can see that I have my Office Home and Business 2021 license there. I'm not going to change the theme. I'm going to leave it as the colorful theme since we're talking about the software today, but there are quite a few different themes that we can change this software application to. Or even the backgrounds. We can have an office background like right now I have this clouds. I can customize it and have no backgrounds, keep it nice and simple there. So we just did a little tour of the start screen. It's useful to know about. It's a good area to get started. But now that we've done that, I just want to start talking a little bit about my favorite template, probably the one I use the most, the blank workbook. Because in this course, I want to talk about quite a few features in Excel. And how I do that is I want to build a spreadsheet that actually tracks the sales of a restaurant that I'm building. The restaurant's called Faz Food. And I'm just going to track some weekly sales, see how much I made for the month, see who sold the most food, who sold the least food, maybe hand out bonuses, depending on that. And I want to build a spreadsheet that I could eventually hopefully print and put on my bulletin board every month. Now, hopefully the spreadsheet's reusable. It has colors and it's pretty, it's formatted, so that way I can put it front facing and print it. And hopefully it all fits on one page. So we want to talk about all those features that allow us to do that using this newer interface that we have. Now, let me click on a blank workbook here and give you a tour of the Office 2021 user interface. I went ahead and launched the blank workbook. And now that I'm in a blank workbook, I just want to talk a little bit about the Office interface because there has been some changes to it. As you all know, the Windows 11 look is quite drastically different than Windows 10. It has much softer bezels, looks like a much more lighter tone, and it has an overall different experience to it. And I've noticed they kind of mimic that look with these Office products. And they actually have a newer interface for the ribbon. Kind of looks more protruded out there, as you can see, with the tabs kind of sticking out a little bit differently than they used to be. And then of course, we're always going to have our command groups still, where we have the labelings on the bottom. We have our command groups. So there is a lot going up there with the new Office 2021 ribbon. Now, one thing I want you to notice though, with this Office 2021 ribbon is that there's actually no quick access toolbar anymore. There used to be a set of tools that we can actually add here. This might alarm people. And don't worry, I've actually found out you can turn it back on. So if you are one of those people that are familiar with the quick access toolbar and you notice you just upgraded and you don't have it anymore, I do want you to feel free to pause the video and first watch what I do and then go add the quick access toolbar to your user interface because I do enjoy using it. Let me go ahead and right click one of these tabs so that I can customize the ribbon. And from there, I actually have an option to specifically customize the quick access toolbar. And now in Office 2021, they're actually going to ask you to, well, turn on the Show Quick Access Toolbar setting. And you can choose the position above or below the ribbon. I'm going to put mine above the ribbon and hit OK. So now I have my quick access toolbar options there where I can add them directly to the top where they used to be there. I can also right click and pin some items there from my toolbar and the ribbon in the command groups as well. So if you do enjoy using your quick access toolbar, I highly recommend to just give this video a pause and go to your ribbon and right click a tab. Just right click any tab, it doesn't matter which one it is, and customize the ribbon so that you can access the quick access toolbar settings. And on the very bottom there, you just have to check mark it on and choose if you want it above or below the ribbon, and hit OK. Glad you did that. If you didn't, it's okay. Maybe one day you will. If not, maybe you like the minimalistic look. Now, I also want to mention that if you want to hide your ribbon, we have a little area there, a little drop down where we can select it. And now we have these settings for the ribbon. We can always show the ribbon. That's my preferred setting. We have a full screen mode, which hides the ribbon until you click on the top. We also have an option for show tabs in case you're on a mobile device or a little laptop. That way you have a small screen, you can save some real estate. So as you click, it shows you the tools. I'm going to always go to always show ribbon though. And I like how they conveniently left hide the quick access toolbar option and show the quick access toolbar option directly there so we can quickly add and remove those toolbars that we have. Pretty interesting. I also want to point out the bottom of our workbook, where our sheet names are, has a little bit more of a rounded bezel look instead of a square look. We can still add our sheets, and of course if you do a right click in this area, you're still going to get the activate window, which is going to be a vertical list of all the sheet names in the workbook. I'm going to take advantage of the zoom slider here. This zoom slider, and I'm going to zoom into the spreadsheet so that we can begin maneuvering around Excel. Great. Nice and zoomed into my spreadsheet here. I'm on cell A1, that's what my name box is showing me. And the cool thing about Excel is today, at any point in time, if you ever want to look for a certain feature, they also have a search box at the very top of the ribbon. This has been here for quite a few iterations now, but it's worth a mention, where you can search for certain features. And even if you need help on them, receive help on them by looking into the Microsoft support articles that open up pretty natively within the software. This is a quick little article on Power Pivot, a great tab that you can use for your pivot tables. I'll go ahead and close that there. So, not many changes to the user interface, but it does have a nice, clean, refreshed look. I want to say the biggest thing that you're going to notice is that your ribbon display options have now moved, and your quick access toolbar is now able to be turned on or off, which is something that we couldn't previously do. Go ahead and pause the video, open up a workbook, play around, take a look at your user interface, set up the settings for your quick access toolbar. I'm going to save my workbook here. I'm going to go ahead and call it the Faz Food monthly sales. So that we can get started. Hopefully you do the same. So now I actually want to begin by typing in these cells and creating the spreadsheet that I would like. And I'm going to do that by adding a title to my spreadsheet. I'm just going to call this one Faz Food. And I'm just going to put on the bottom there, always fresh. And why not, always Faz? That's me. Now, when I hit enter here, I just want to point out for people, when you hit enter in Excel, that actually moves down something known as your cell address box, which is that green box there. And the enter key is how we navigate and essentially move it down a cell space. So I'm going to hit enter just one more time because I do want to add some headers to my spreadsheet because I want to actually track the salespeople. And I just want to do a week by week breakdown. And now that I've actually added in salesperson, I just want to mention another little shortcut that I use. Because I did move over to this cell over here. I moved basically to the right. That's what I essentially did. I moved over. And in order to do that, I simply clicked on the tab key. And that actually went ahead and moved me to the right hand side. And now, of course, if I hold down to shift and tab, that's actually going to move me back to the left. Same thing with enter. Extremely useful to navigate with shortcuts, especially when you get to more advanced topics like an Excel expert when we talk about macros. So now that I have this here, I actually want to add in a quick little column for week 1. And I notice when we are typing in spreadsheets, there are certain situations where words get cut off in the cell. And that's not a big deal. I mean, there's many ways we can fix this, but this might happen all over the place. It might happen over several different columns. We can always go to the top of each one of these columns where the letters are. That's where the column is. And between them, you can always expand them to make them bigger or smaller. However, I've always dealt with situations where I have multiple columns. Multiple columns that have that situation. Like this column and this column now. And I like to mention in my beginner courses that there's this little triangle here next to your column headers. And you give it a little click, it's going to select all the columns and all the rows in the entire sheet. And if you go ahead and do a double click in between one of the columns or one of the rows, it's going to give you a best fit for the entire spreadsheet since everything's selected for entire columns or for the entire rows. So notice how the salesperson column is nice and large simply because it takes the place of the largest cell and it fits the column to that size. Where B and C fit the cell size of week 1 and week 2. So always remember, if you need to quickly fix a spreadsheet sizing for these cells, or if you see a lot of pound signs or hash signs within cells when you have numbers, it's just letting you know that these cells are too small to display something for you. And you might want to quickly click on that triangle and do a double click on the rows or the columns, depending on what situation it is, to quickly get it fixed for you. I usually do that before I email something out or quickly before I save the workbook and close it. So the next time I open up, it's nice and clean. Now that I actually have these headers in place where I put week 1 and week 2, I want to continue on by adding in week 3 and week 4 in these cells. But in order to do that, I'm going to take advantage of a tool called autofill. Now, I want you all to know that every cell that you have a cell address box on has this little square, a green one, on the corner of it. That's the autofill handle. And what it's going to do is it's going to help you. If you have a word and a number, it's going to increment that number next to the word. So I can have week 4, week 5, quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3. I can do months, I can do days. Let me go ahead and expand this here. I'm gonna make it to week 3 and I'm gonna make it to week 4. Now a lot of people are new to this when they use the autofill handle. Please make sure that when you are using it that you're making sure to see the visual indicator that you're on top of the autofill handle by looking at the skinny black crosshair before left clicking and holding and dragging across. Looking good, looking good. So there's something I want to do here to my headers. Currently, I have my headers in, but what I want to do is I want to highlight them. I want to highlight all of these headers so that I can align them in the middle of the cell for each one of these cells. And in order to actually do that, it's a really simple process, but I want to talk about keyboard shortcuts to do things, because this is definitely where the power of efficiency comes in. In real life, you might have 50, 60, you might have a whole year's worth of data that you're highlighting, not just 4 weeks. And knowing these keyboard shortcuts will save an immense amount of time when highlighting things. So if I needed to highlight this top row from the very start here, I can always use Control Shift, and then I can choose a directional arrow. And it will highlight in that direction until it meets a blank cell. Let me try that out. Control Shift to the right. I like. And of course, I can always go to my Home tab, and under the Alignment command group, I can center these items here. Great. Now that I have this in here, what I want to do is I also want to continue by adding in the actual salespeople names. And then hopefully giving them some data, some raw data that I can put in that I have for the month. So I'm just going to add in some salespeople here. Let me go ahead and put my name as one of the salespeople. Here, I'll go ahead and put some familiar names that we might have heard of, maybe not. Keep it simple. It's a small staff, super small team. We're going to keep it with only 4 of us. So now that I have this here, I want to actually start adding in some data to my spreadsheet. So when I enter in data, I'm going to put my cell address box on a cell. I'm just going to add in some data, some fake numbers like 50. I'm going to hit Tab to move over to the right so I can add in 100. And now I want to talk a little bit about another trick that we want to take advantage of. We want to get used to it. It has to do with the autofill handle again. My autofill handle. Remember that thing I just used a moment ago where I highlighted a chunk of cells or a cell and this little square was pulled? Well, what happens if you do it with 2 cells selected instead of just 1, right? That's what I have now. It's actually going to follow a pattern. So this pattern is plus 50. So in these next cells, if I actually pull my autofill handle in that direction to the right, it's going to be 150 and 200. Let me go ahead and pull that. And of course, autofill tries to help as much as possible. So if you end up pulling it down and you have too many cells selected, like it's not going to recognize a pattern here. But it will help you by copying down the cells now. I'm going to go ahead and drag down here. So copied it. I'm going to drag down here again. And I'm going to drag down here again. So I have some fake numbers in here, just some fake sales data to get the spreadsheet template a little bit of a look. I wanted to see how it would look with numbers in it. However, this is supposed to actually display sales data. And what I want for these actual cells are for them to have a data type for the currency values that I'm displaying. And in order to do something like that, I want to actually use the keyboard shortcuts to highlight the chunk of swells, or cells I should say. I can always use the keyboard shortcut to highlight to the right. And of course, I can always use the keyboard shortcut to highlight all the way down. Now that I have this highlighted, I have multiple routes that I can take to add this currency format. Now inside my Home tab, I actually have a number command group where I can toggle on the currency format and hide my decimal places. But I'm all about efficiency. And if you notice, there's actually keyboard shortcuts for many things that we're talking about today. And if you want, you can always use Control-Shift and the number 4 at the same time being held. Remember, the number 4 holds a $sign to change those cells that you have selected to a currency format. That's pretty convenient. If you change it to 5, it goes to percentage. Date, time is 3, 2. 1 is general. Or 1 is number. Tilde is general. I'm going to hit the Control-Shift-4 there. Rather simple. Keeps it smooth. I didn't have to move my hands anywhere. I didn't have to go away from the keyboard. Now the final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to knock away these decimal places by holding down the Alt key and clicking on the letter H, because that's where the H key is. And then I'm going to click on the number 9, because that's going to hide the decimal place. And you can also do it really fast. You can hit Alt and then H and then 9 really fast, and it'll hide the decimal places. I've been talking for a while though, and I've actually produced quite a nice spreadsheet. There's not any color to it, but I have the layout down. I have the columns created and the headers in them. I have some sample data. I have all the salespeople's names on the roster. Got the title, the slogan. Things are looking good. I centered the headers, added the currency data type that I needed. Now what I would like you to do is just pause this video and catch up. If you haven't been doing so, pause the video and create this spreadsheet. Use those shortcuts. Practice the data types, adding in cells, hitting enter, hitting tab, hitting shift enter. Navigate around. Go back to the video and rewatch certain parts as you do it. But definitely practice with those shortcuts in mind. Hopefully I'll see you soon. Pause the video, give this a try, and come right back. Welcome back. Hopefully you had fun creating the spreadsheet, practicing the shortcuts. And now that we have some data, or some names actually in here, something I want to mention that we have available since Office 2016, in case you come across a word you're not familiar with, or you want to get some information, an article about something, there's a tool known as Smart Lookup, where you can always look up information using a Bing search directly from the spreadsheet. And of course, once I'm done with this search, I can close it. And it's just worth a mention when you have this cool feature known as Smart Lookup with a right click, or you can always go over to, if I'm not mistaken, the Review tab. And the smart lookup is available under the insights command group. Very interesting stuff. They try to get you to stay in Excel as much as possible instead of hopping away to these various browsers that you might need to use with this feature. So now that I have this in here, I have this data in here, what I want to actually do is I want to build a column that tracks the totals for these salespeople. And in order to do that, I have to perform these simple calculations. A sum. I have to sum certain cells. And there's so many ways to do that in Excel. So many different ways. And I just want to talk about these various ways that we have available, since this is a beginner course. Let me build a total column here. And I just want to run through the various ways you can perform simple calculations or even build a formula to do the job. Now, the most basic way to actually add something in Excel, or to run a formula, an equation, a function, is to start your cell with an equal sign. That tells Excel, hey, I'm about to do a formula, I'm about to do a calculation. And if you want, you can actually select the cells that you want to use in the formula by selecting the cell once the equal sign is there. So instead of actually putting the numbers you want, although some people do this, putting the numbers that you want, it's much more preferred to put the cell address you want. Tell Excel where to look. That way, in case the number changes in the spreadsheet, you don't have to go running to update the total column as well. Now, of course, this way might take a little time if you have a lot of numbers to add. And it seems kind of like a repetitive process there with even 4 cells. But if I sum up B5 plus C5, D5, and E5 and hit enter, because I'll go down a cell, I'll total to 500 as it should there. On the bottom of Excel, there's something known as a status bar. If you haven't heard of it before, the bottom of that software is called the status bar, where our zoom slider is located, and it actually shows us the sum is 500. When you have cells highlighted, of course. So another way of actually doing a calculation is, instead, you're still going to need an equal sign, but this time you're going to use a function from the Excel's function library. It ends up showing you all the function names once you start filtering for it and start typing in a few letters. Like, I want to use the sum function, and I can filter for sum. And once I end up highlighting it, I can always click on the tab key to fill in the rest for me. And this essentially allows me to highlight a chunk of cells within a parentheses so that I can use the sum function to add up all these cells for myself without manually adding those plus signs in. Those are repetitive tasks. You know, there's even a way where you can highlight. Remember, we know shortcuts. We know the shortcut where we can highlight something with Control, Shift, and the right arrow. I'm going to do that to highlight the Michael Scott there. And if I want, I can also do this thing where I can hit Alt plus an equal sign. This is actually going to use a tool known as AutoSum. You have to hold the equal sign and the Alt key at the same time. It's called AutoSum. And when I do that, if I hit Alt and the equal key, it'll actually run a sum function for me on the row that I had selected. The issue with that is every time you do it, it's always going to show up on the cell right next to it. So if you didn't want the answer to be right next to it, that wouldn't be your way. Now, of course, I'm going to highlight this, Control Shift to the right. And one final way that I want to talk about is using something invented In 2016, it was called the Quick Analysis tool, where we can always quickly access a set of tools that are already in our ribbon, but one of those tools is called totals. And if I want, I can always select the sum as one of the totals there. It did make it bold for me, but that's always a quick fix by turning off the bold there. So many ways to do the same task, honestly. Performing a simple calculation or doing a formula, using a tool known as quick analysis. All these things are going to get the job done and add up some cells, subtract some cells, maybe multiply some cells. We'll play around with those functions coming soon, but the one basic one I wanted to start out with was sum, to just perform simple calculations across the workbook. Now, something I want to mention is I've been talking for a little bit. I've added a lot to the spreadsheet. I use OneDrive. You may be using OneDrive or another cloud service, but when you do save your Word files, Excel files, PowerPoint files on OneDrive, autosave actually turns on. I don't have to worry about saving anything because it automatically saves it for me. But I just want you to spend a moment of time, if you haven't yet, going to the File tab and saving a copy of the workbook, if you have yet to do so. Or hit the save button you've already gave it a name, just to keep and save all the data that you've currently added. You never know when you get an unexpected crash or a power outage. So, now that we've practiced filling out a totals row, before we move on to some other, I wouldn't even call them more advanced functions, just some different functions like max, min, count, I want you to practice. I want you to practice doing a formula by putting in the actual cell addresses. I want you to practice by actually putting in a sum function. Use your keyboard shortcut to highlight things. Use AutoSum, Alt plus equal. Use quick analysis. Highlight the cells and go to the square there. When you are done practicing the totals, go ahead and come back to the video and press play, and we'll continue with some more basic calculations, formulas, or functions that we should use throughout Excel. All right. While you're away, I went ahead and added a few extra cells in the spreadsheet. Let me go ahead and highlight these two columns. I just want to add some borders around it as well. I'm going to add some borders around these cells, because I want to actually use the sales data that I have, and I want to figure out some totals, the average, the max, what's the biggest number, what's the smallest number, and how many numbers are in the data set. Let's start out with the total here. So of course we're going to use the function library in Excel, and we've already used this one quite a few times, the sum function. Always remember to click on tab, please. It saves you quite a bit of time with these longer function names that we're going to see in just a moment. And with sum here, I'm simply going to highlight this chunk of squares. Remember, we have keyboard shortcuts if there's really large, but that's going to grab our total there. Let me go ahead and grab that so I don't double up the values. And I'm going to close the parenthesis. And when I hit enter, it's going to find me the sum. So that's 2,000, makes sense. There's 4 rows of 500. In the average, there's also another function that I can find. And once I type in AV, I can go down and find average and click tab to fill in the rest for me. And of course, I'm just going to highlight week 1 through week 4 to find me the average of 125. And of course, the biggest sale is using a function called max, where I can highlight a chunk of cells, and it's going to find the biggest number within those cells. And of course, min will find the smallest number. Now count's the final one there. And when you use a count, what it's essentially going to do it's going to count the values. Like how many values you actually have selected. So there's 16 values, makes sense. There's 4 rows with 4 weeks. 4 by 4 is 16. So pretty simple to practice these functions. Now again, a lot of times people, they actually go to the formulas tab, and you can actually insert functions as well using the insert function dialog box. This does take a little time to fill out for each little function, but if this is your way, where you use the sum function, you might want to take advantage of it. I'm going to hit sum and hit OK, and then I can go ahead and select the cells that I want to add inside this form. So that's another way of doing the same thing, the same functions. I can use the formulas tab and go to insert function, and this one's average, yeah. I can always go ahead and select these cells and hit OK. I can do the same thing for the max. Instead of writing it in the cell with an equal sign, I can hit insert function, which adds the equal sign. Find the max function, hit OK, select the cells I want to use for max, and same thing for min, if need be. Of course, I don't see min in the list, so I have to search for it. There it is, and I can hit OK, and from there I can highlight the same chunk of cells. Let's do this count just to get all of them in. I'm going to type in count just to hit go. Oh, there it is on the bottom there. And from there I can highlight these chunk of cells and hit OK. And I'm just going to re-highlight everything, and I'm going to go to the Home tab and add the borders again. So rather simple, whether you're using the insert function from the formulas tab or you're just adding the equal sign and typing the function name in and hitting tab. Both ways are there available for you. Great. Go ahead and pause this video, and I do want you to try these other functions that we have besides just sum. Now, before you go, I want to give you a bonus. I'm going to give you a bonus function. I'm going to go to cell E1 here, and I want to type in the date in cell F1. And I want the date to always show me the current date. And I have a function called today. And there nothing goes inside the parentheses, but they need to be there. And what that's going to do is it will add me the date inside of the cell. And tomorrow I'll say whatever date tomorrow is, and so on and so forth. So it's a nice function to go ahead and have the current date from your computer time displayed on the spreadsheet. So now that I've covered that, go ahead and pause the video, practice these simple functions before moving on. Now that we have the basics down, I want to do another formula. I consider this a simple function as well. But I actually added another cell at the top where each salesperson actually has a goal they have to meet. And it looks like everyone met the goal, it's 500. But I want to actually track that using a function. So if they met the goal, I just want to have the letter P for pass. And if they didn't, it's going to say F for fail, which none of them failed. They all passed. We're the dream team here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a function in our function library known as the if function. It simply goes and it checks whether something is either true or it checks whether something is false. If that ends up being true, you can do something. If it ends up being false, you can do something else. This if function here has 3 different arguments you have to fill in. The logical test, the value if true, and the value if false. I can always compare if this cell, F5, is greater than or equal to the cell with my monthly goal. So that's my logical test. That can either be true or it can be false. Now the value if true is what I want Excel to do if it ends up being true. I'm just going to say the letter P, and because P isn't a number, I have to put it in quotes so that it can display the character. And if it ends up being false, I'm going to hit comma. After each one of these, I'm hitting comma. If it ends up being false, I want to hit F, which none of us actually failed. And I'm going to close my parenthesis. So it's rather simple. It just checks whether this cell is greater than or equal to this cell. And if it's true, it's going to say P. If it's false, it's going to say F. But none of us are false. We all are equal to 500 actually. Now I actually can use autofill, that tiny little square, on a formula. Oh, that's weird. Someone failed. Even though it's 500. That's really weird. Let's look into this. Let's see why. So when I did this autofill, so this was the original formula, yeah, with F5 and F2. Autofill actually is going to change the cell address of a formula when you drag it down. So notice how this says F6 now. It's comparing this cell. Oh, in a blank cell. That makes a lot of sense. And this one was just a word. That's why it said fail. It compared to a word. So I guess the value of this word is big. But that's not even comparing what we want it to. It's not comparing the correct cell. So what I'm going to do here is I need to absolutely reference. It's called absolutely reference a certain cell address. I can lock in this cell address so that when I use my autofill, it will remain at F2 and only F5 will go to F6 to F7 to F8. That way I'll compare the correct cells. And in order to do that, I simply add a $sign around the F and a $sign around the 2. When I end up hitting enter here and I redo my autofill, you're going to see it all change to pass. And if I go and I just really quickly, I'm going to browse through these, they're all pointing at F2 because I've absolutely referenced this cell address to lock it in place. So it is kind of interesting to know that autofill works a little different with functions and formulas. They change the cell addresses within them. But in case you need to have them fixed, we can always use absolute referencing. In situations like the goal situation here, where we had one cell that needed to stay put and others needed to go down, we can always absolute reference one or the other. I do want you to try this out, filling out an if. This is as far as the functions I will go. I'll keep that as simple functions, but absolute referencing is definitely something I wanted to cover so we can get the basics of it down. Autofill, absolute referencing. Go ahead and give this a try. Pause the video and come back so we can continue on. Now, something that's worth a mention since we are using the newest version of Office is if you want to check if you're using any features that might not be available in other versions. So far we haven't. We can always go to the File tab and under Info, we can inspect the workbook. I'm seeing more and more something we have to use is check compatibility, just to make sure we're not using any features that aren't supported by earlier versions of Microsoft Excel. I can also have this turned on to check itself every time I save the workbook. So definitely run this if you are working with clients that are outside the org and you're using advanced features. Not many in this course, but maybe something like XLOOKUP or XMatch or the let functions, or we'll talk about in the more expert sessions or intermediate sessions. Those will definitely cause the compatibility checker to run a quick little check and tell you that you might not see those functions on another versions of Excel. Yeah, definitely worth an issue, worth a check, compatibility